I draw the attention of honourable members to the passing of Mr Ted Egan, former Administrator of the Northern Territory from 2003 to 2007. On behalf of honourable members, I extend a very warm welcome to the family and friends of Mr Egan in the chamber today. In accordance with the wishes of the family, yes, I won't go there. I'd like to call the Chief Minister to speak.
Madam Speaker, I move that this Assembly express its condolences to the family and friends of Mr Egan. Madam Speaker, today we move this motion of condolence to recognise and celebrate Edward Joseph Egan AO. His innings is over, his bat laid down. Ted passed away on the 4th of December 2025 at the age of 93 after a life of extraordinary breadth, service and contribution to the Northern Territory and to Australia. I'd like to thank Ted's wife, Neris, and children Greg, Margaret, Mark and Jackie for trusting us to remember and record his contribution for future generations. I also thank Neris, Greg and Margaret for being in attendance today, along with many others of Ted's close friends and people who admired him. Thank you everyone who is here today. Neris. On the 17th of February in Alice Springs, we held a state memorial for Ted following a private family funeral. The state memorial was grand, and Neris was perched on the edge of her seat, enjoying the near 3 hours of speeches, performances, videos, dances, and photos that combined into the most fitting of farewells. About 500 people were there to pay their respects and remember a mate. As the momentum of love and adoration grew over the course of the memorial, it culminated in the whole crowd, Neris leading the charge and every performer standing and singing the song, This Land, Australia. Ted was born on the 6th of July 1932 in Coburg, Victoria. He was born at home, weighing in at 5.5 kilos, an Irish Catholic who, for all his childhood, slept on the back porch adjacent to the wash house. His early years in Darwin were formative. He got involved in the local Australian rules football games and played with the likes of the Flying Chinaman Ronald Chin and against a bloke who introduced himself as Bob Wilson. Ted wrote, "He proceeded to give me a football lesson. He kicked 6 goals and works, copped their first hiding. Bob and I later became good friends. He eventually changed his name to Robert Tudawali as he became a famous film actor, first starring in the classic 1955 film Jeddah, followed by many other roles. Ted loved his sport and actively participated wherever and whenever he could. He was a daily Catholic communicant at the time, and in 1952 he was instructed, not asked, by Bishop O'Loughlin to be a founder with Father Aubrey Collins of the St Mary's Football Club in Darwin. I acknowledge the presence of St Mary's Football absolute diehards over there in the corner, Madam Speaker. The teams they fielded were a blend of local Indigenous, mainly Tiwi back then, and non-Indigenous players. To say they were successful was an understatement. Although not as successful on the weekend, fellas. Oh, not to mention the war. It's always next season. Ted was their first captain in 1952-53 and took the club to their first premiership in 1954-55. He remained a keen supporter of the club for the rest of his life. St Mary's Football Club is a powerhouse in Northern Territory football, a premiership juggernaut with 34 wins across 55 grand finals, which is part of Ted Egan's extensive legacy. It was during his footy years that Ted came under the influence of a remarkable Tiwi man, Aloysius Purantarala. As Ted recounted, the Tiwi run names together like that. So at first they called me Tigangani. A few years later, Aloysius gave me my real name, Murumaji Miri. It will be on my tombstone. His affinity for and appreciation of Indigenous people was mutually felt. From Borroloola to Yuendamu, from Maningrida to Groot Island, he devoted himself to the people and communities of the Northern Territory. As a patrol officer, teacher, superintendent, protector, and later as a district officer, Ted saw the Territory at its most remote and its most resilient, and he always stood up for the people that he served. He learnt various Aboriginal languages, not merely as an academic exercise, but as a gesture of respect and curiosity. He recognised that to serve a community effectively, one must listen in its own language. Through songs like Gurindji Blues, which he co-wrote with Vincent Lingiari, his service on the First Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation, and his historical writing, Ted helped bring national attention to the stories of land rights, justice, and the long journey of reconciliation. In many ways, his connections to Indigenous Territorians were personal, whether it be through sport, as a parole officer, a teacher, a bureaucrat, or through actions like saving a young David Gulpilil from drowning. In Ted's words, David reminded me that he was the drowning little kid I had pulled out of the Liverpool River in 1957. His beautiful Maradilla, My Mother's Dreaming, adorns our living room wall. When he presented that painting to me, he said, "Thank you for saving my life." Ted also spoke the language of every man, and he used all mediums available to share the stories of the bush, the land, the real people of the Northern Territory and Australia, and the unsung legends. In this regard, he proved a prolific songwriter, recording more than 30 albums with many songs featuring his trusty Foster phone. Ted's musical career was extensive, to say the least, and it was on full display at the State Memorial, Madam Speaker. Ted was inspired by the stories of the outback, and he sought to ensure those stories and the characters were not forgotten or dismissed. The Shearers, the Aboriginals, the Overlanders, the Anzacs, the convicts. His Faces of Australia series is a unique collection of tributes and storytelling. Each song has a story behind it, mostly a piece of Australian history told in an entertaining and in no way disparaging way. Of course, there's the iconic Drover's Boy, which itself became another story through Ted and Neris's efforts to get the song made into a feature film. Madam Speaker, through songs such as the Drover's Boy and the Gurindji Blues, through his books and broadcasts, through his decades of storytelling, he gave voice to histories that might otherwise have not been told or even forgotten. He helped Australians better understand the land, the people, and the spirit of the North. Ted did not simply document history, he walked alongside it. Madam Speaker, as Administrator of the Northern Territory from 2003 to 2007, Ted and Neris brought a spirit of openness and hospitality to Government House that is still spoken of with great affection. They welcomed thousands of Territorians through their doors, not with formality alone, but with a genuine warmth. Ted showed that leadership could be both dignified and approachable, that public office could still be personal and human and connected to the very people it serves. Open days at Government House would often include performances by local artists, including sometimes a song or two with Ted and Neris. He had the rare gift of making people feel at ease, whether it was at an official function, a community gathering, or simply sharing a quiet moment over a story and a song. A national living treasure, an officer of the Order of Australia, a distinguished author, musician, public servant, and the 18th Administrator of the Northern Territory. He was awarded the National Folk Festival Lifetime Achievement Award and inducted into the Tamworth Country Music Festival's Hands of Fame. And for more than half a century, Ted helped shape the cultural and civic life of our Northern Territory. He was the epitome of someone who lived his life to the fullest, a humble man with incredible life experience. He was a gifted communicator and tireless advocate whose work preserved history and really deepened Australia's understanding of our stories. Madam Speaker, there are of course many more stories that speak to the character and the distinct sense of humour that Ted had. I had the privilege of visiting Sinkatini Downs and spent time with Ted and Neris in their cherished home, a place built with love and perseverance between 1983 and 1989. Madam Speaker, in an era that often moves too quickly, Ted reminded us to sit, to listen, and to learn. And perhaps the greatest tribute we can offer is to carry that spirit forward. Madam Speaker, the other great tribute Ted leaves is his beautiful family. Neris, his wife, his 4 children, Greg, Margaret, Mark and Jackie, 7 beloved grandchildren and 16 great-grandchildren. Neris was his soulmate from the time they met in 1981. She sang with him, worked with him, shared his wins and his losses. She was his partner and his muse. They were companions for life. To Neris, he was not only a life companion, but a source of excitement, warmth, and unwavering affection. Madam Speaker, I could certainly go on for hours, and there are many stories to tell, and today in the chamber we get that opportunity to put on the record his enormous contribution to the Northern Territory and the many lives that he touched and shaped. He was a leader shaped by service, not by status. He may not have been a Territorian by birth, Madam Speaker, but he most definitely was at heart and soul, and we will all miss him deeply. To his family, I thank you for sharing Ted with us, and that we have had the opportunity to honour him. The saying goes, he has achieved success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much. By that measure, Madam Speaker, Ted Egan was very successful indeed. Thank you, Neris, for letting us have this opportunity to honour him in such a special way. Our condolences to family and friends, and we certainly look forward to all of the speeches today. This is a true celebration of life, a life well lived, a man well loved, and you should be incredibly proud. Thank you, Neris.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Chief Minister for bringing forward the condolence motion before the House today to honour the life of Mr Ted Egan. But, Madam Speaker, how do you describe a man like Ted Egan? A man whose life has touched so many people in so many different ways. To some, he was Ted Egan the writer, capturing characters and telling stories of the Northern Territory. To others, he was a folk singer whose songs spoke honestly about the realities of life across the country. And to his family, he was a son, a husband, a dad, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. Today, I'd like to speak about some of the moments in Mr Egan's life that have made him such a remarkable Territorian. Ted wasn't born in the Territory. He came here as a young man from Melbourne in 1949, looking for adventure. And it was during his first adventure in the Territory that one of his most important chapters of his life happened. As a young man, Ted was asked by Bishop O'Loughlin to help establish a new football club in Darwin, St Mary's Football Club. The idea was to encourage Aboriginal men to play in mainstream football at a time when this was not widely accepted or encouraged. At a time when cultural divides were still very real in Darwin, and young Ted Egan was already helping bring people together. That alone says a great deal about his character and shows how remarkable he was. Through St Mary's, Ted formed strong friendships with Tiwi men and began learning the language through song. That experience changed him. It opened his eyes to the depth of Aboriginal culture, stories, history, connection to country, and it set Ted on a path that would shape the rest of his life here in the Territory. Over the next 25 years, Ted worked alongside Aboriginal Territorians across the NT, supporting their voices and helping to ensure that their stories were heard. Mr Egan was and continues to be today a respected leader across our Aboriginal communities and, of course, across the wider community in the Territory. One of the most powerful examples of this came during the Wave Hill Walk-Off in 1966, when Vincent Lingiari and the Gurindji people walked off Wave Hill Station in protest against injustice. Mr Egan played an important role linking Gurindji leaders on the ground with decision-makers in Canberra. Ted helped carry their message forward. And as we all know, in between being a champion for Aboriginal Territorians and an advocate for everyday Territorians, Ted was also a gifted songwriter and folk singer. Over his lifetime, he produced more than 30 albums and wrote 17 books, sharing the stories of the Territory with the rest of the country and indeed the rest of the world. Songs like Gurindji Blues told the stories of the Wave Hill Walk-Off and helped bring national attention to the Gurindji people's fight for land rights. And Madam Speaker, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, and I'm sure Ted's music will be belted across homes and communities right here in the Territory and across the country. Through his music, Ted didn't just entertain, he educated. The role as an educator didn't end in his music or the classroom. It stayed with him throughout his life and followed him into the next chapter of his public service. When Ted Egan took on the role of Administrator of the Northern Territory in 2003, it came as no surprise to those who knew him. And by that time of his life, Ted had spent decades working in the public service and helping build relationships right across the territory. He was widely respected, considered a gentleman, and was called a brother and a friend to many Aboriginal Territorians from both the top end and Central Australia. All of this meant that he was uniquely placed to represent the Northern Territory to the rest of the country and the world. As the Northern Territory's Administrator, Mr Egan continued doing what he had always done, sharing the stories of the Territory, celebrating the stories across the Territory, bringing people together and representing this remarkable place with absolute pride. When I was reading articles about Ted after he passed, there were many beautiful reflections from friends, from families, from colleagues who shared the memories of this remarkable man. But there was one thing that kept appearing again and again, something that explains why Ted Egan was so respected by those who knew him and Territorians more broadly. He listened to people. He learned from people. And he respected every one of their stories. Madam Speaker, even in later years of his life, Ted never stopped sharing the stories of this place that he loved so deeply. Through his music, his writing and his storytelling, he helped generations of Territorians and fellow Australians better understand the history of this place and the people and the spirit of this land. Mr Egan may not have been born in the Territory, but he embodied the Territory spirit and what it truly means to be a great Territorian. And Madam Speaker, I get the opportunity today, on this very special day, to celebrate the life of Mr Egan, and I'd like to share some words from Labor's first Chief Minister, Ms Claire Martin, who called Ted to let him know that she was Labor's pick for the Administrator. These are words from Claire Martin. When the need for a new Administrator arose, Claire took her then Cabinet, Jack Arquette, the person who first suggested Ted Egan, and the entire Cabinet unanimously backed the suggestion, recognising that he was the embodiment of all bits best of the Territory. However, when Claire rang Ted to ask him if he would be open to her putting his name forward, he was on tour in New South Wales and his first reaction was to say no. Claire said it was a response born out of modesty, that he didn't really see himself as fit for a vice-regal position. Claire convinced him to sleep on it, and the next day, perhaps with a bit of persuasion from Neris, he agreed. At one of his first press conferences, he was asked what he was going to do with his beer carton. The suggestion that playing a beer carton as a musical instrument was a hearty and fitting thing for an administrator to do. Of course, we should guess what Ted's answer was. Madam Speaker, when he was out on official administrator duties, Mr Egan did leave his beer carton behind, but he did find a reasonable substitute. Instead of tapping on a beer carton, he would use a lectern and a mic on it, which gave a similar sound to a beer carton playing the music. Claire remembers that he might not have had his trusty beer carton, but throughout his time as the Northern Territory Administrator, he still sang at many, many events, bringing much joy to all the people who attended. Madam Speaker, people would invite Mr Egan to sing, in fact. They loved having him belt out a tune. Whether it was for a small community gathering or a more formal event, he was never short of a song. Claire Martin also recalls what an incredible team Ted and Neris were. Neris, a warm presence who hugged everyone as she met. She was Ted's secret weapon, and they were a formidable pair together. Madam Speaker, I had the honour of growing up on Mr Egan's music. My parents were big fans, and I remember the first time seeing him as the Territory Administrator and my dad going, "Hey, that's Ted Egan." I said, "Oh, is he the musician?" He goes, "Yeah, but he's also the Administrator." So what a great story in the Territory to mark a remarkable life. And the last time that I saw Mr Egan was in my electorate of Arnhem in Mataranka, where Ted and Neris came down to the Mataranka markets after the Mataranka Rodeo. And lo and behold, he's the former NT Administrator busking in the middle of Mataranka with his little sheet down and getting a few coin in the middle of the Mataranka markets. Fantastic memory to have. Madam Speaker, our Labor opposition would like to give their sincere condolences to his loving wife Neris and his children, Greg and Mark and Jackie. To Ted's great-grandchildren and his grandchildren, on the passing of such a remarkable man, family man, a Territorian, and a music legend. We share in your heartbreak, but we will also smile and sing loudly when we remember the titan of a man who showed the world the very best of what the Territory looked like. Vale, Mr. Ted Egan.
Member for Namatjira.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm very proud today to rise and honour the life of a remarkable Territorian and our former Administrator of the Northern Territory, Ted Egan AO, and to reflect on the profound respect shown to him at his state memorial. And it's really pleasing to have Neris and Ted's family here today. And Madam Speaker, the state memorial was a fitting tribute to a man whose life was inseparable from the story of the Northern Territory, and it brought together family, friends, Aboriginal leaders, musicians, former colleagues and Territorians from all walks of life. And it was a powerful reflection of the reach Ted's contribution has made to this place. And for me, Madam Speaker, it captured his personality, his warmth, his humour and, of course, his humanity, and those qualities that so many people experienced when they met him. Ted had a remarkable ability to connect with people, make them feel welcome, and to leave them feeling that their stories mattered. And I could think of no better way to reflect on and celebrate the life and achievements of Ted through what could be probably best described as a concert. The memorial captured the essence of Ted and his life through song and story. And it was fitting, Madam Speaker, because that's how Ted lived his life, telling the stories of the Territory and of Territorians through music, through writing and through conversation. The songs that were performed at the memorial were not simply entertainment, they were pieces of history, reflections of lived experience and reminders of the people and events that have shaped the Northern Territory. And of course, Madam Speaker, Ted was above all a servant of the Territory. Arriving here as a young man and becoming a patrol officer, he built a life grounded in curiosity, respect and deep engagement with people of the bush. In those early years, travelling across some of the most remotest parts of the Territory, Ted gained an understanding of this place that few people really possess to this day. He didn't simply work in remote communities, he listened, he learned and he formed lifelong friendships. And those experiences shaped him profoundly. Like many Territorians who came before him and many who followed, Ted learned that the Territory reveals itself not through distance or observation, but through lived experience. It is through travelling the country, sitting down with people, listening to their stories and understanding their history that one truly comes to know the Territory. Ted embraced that journey wholeheartedly. And Madam Speaker, those experiences went on to inform his work as a historian, an author and a songwriter. Ted believed strongly that the stories of the Northern Territory, particularly those stories of Aboriginal Territorians, needed to be preserved honestly and shared widely. He understood that the history of this place was complex, sometimes confronting, but always important. Through his music and writing, Ted documented stories that might otherwise have been lost. He gave voice to people whose stories had too often gone unheard. Many Territorians will of course remember the songs such as Gurindji Blues, which told the story of the Wave Hill Walk-Off and the struggle of the Gurindji people for recognition and land rights. Through songs like that, Ted helped bring important chapters of Territory history to a wider audience. He did not approach these stories as an outsider looking in though, Madam Speaker. He approached them as someone who had built relationships, who had listened deeply and who felt a responsibility to ensure that those stories were not forgotten. Madam Speaker, at his state memorial, that commitment to truth-telling and cultural respect was front and centre. Those tributes that were shared recognised not only his public roles, but the deep and enduring relationship he formed with Aboriginal communities from right across the Territory. His life's work in recording oral histories and advocating for the recognition was remembered not only as an academic exercise, but as a genuine partnership and respect. Those relationships, Madam Speaker, were built over decades. They were grounded in trust, honesty and mutual respect. And of course, Ted's contribution to the Territory took many forms over the course of his life. Being a patrol officer, a public servant, as a historian, a songwriter, an author, and ultimately the administrator of the Northern Territory. Few people have served this place in so many different ways. And in each of those roles, Madam Speaker, he carried the same values: humility, curiosity, and a deep respect for the people of the Territory. In 2003, when Ted was appointed Administrator of the Northern Territory, it was recognition for decades of service and dedication. It was also recognition, Madam Speaker, of a unique role he had played in helping shape the cultural identity of the Northern Territory. As Administrator, Ted brought a warmth and approachability to Government House, along with his partner Neris. He understood that the position was not simply ceremonial. It represented unity, continuity and service to all Territorians. And he carried out those responsibilities with dignity until 2007, always mindful that he was there on behalf of the people. He approached the role not as a distant figure of authority, but as someone who remained deeply connected to our community. And Madam Speaker, Ted's State Memorial reflected that same spirit. It was not simply a ceremony of a former office holder. It was a gathering for a Territorian whose life had touched communities right across generations. As I've mentioned, music featured prominently, as it had throughout his life, and this was entirely appropriate. Because Ted's storytelling was never confined to books or academic writing, it lived in song, in shared memory and in conversation. His music carried the stories of this place, stories of hardship, stories of resilience, humour and humanity. Through his songs, people were reminded of the Territory's past and of the individuals who actually shaped it. Madam Speaker, what stood out the most at the memorial was the breadth of respect shown for Ted. People from across political divides, across regions and across cultures all came together to pay tribute. That kind of respect cannot be manufactured. It cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. And of course, Ted earned that through a lifetime of genuine engagement with people. He always sought out connection, and he believed deeply in this place, the Northern Territory, in all its complexity, resilience and distinct identity. He understood that the Territory is unlike anywhere else in Australia, and something that we're all very proud of. It is a place where people from many cultures come together, a place where history is deeply felt, a place where community matters. And Ted loved the Territory, and the Territory loved him in return. Madam Speaker, his appointment as an Officer of the Order of Australia recognised his contribution at the national level. But perhaps, Madam Speaker, the most meaningful honour was the State Memorial itself, the Territory pausing to say thank you. It was a moment for Territorians to reflect on the life of someone who had given so much to this place. And Madam Speaker, in this chamber, we often debate policy vigorously, and of course that's our responsibility. We represent different communities and different perspectives, and our debates can sometimes be robust, to say the least. But today we stand together in recognising a life of service marked by authenticity, courage and compassion. Ted Egan helped shape the Territory's cultural identity. He reminded us that understanding our past is essential to building our future. And he demonstrated that leadership is strongest when it is granted in humility and respect. Madam Speaker, Ted's love for the Territory, and in particular for Central Australia, was never in doubt. I can personally recall on many occasions where Ted used his depth of understanding and knowledge to provide insight and advice about our community. And I can tell you, Madam Speaker, he had no qualms about providing that advice to me and make sure that I acted upon it. He had a remarkable ability to place events in a historical context and to remind us that the Territory story is always evolving. Those conversations were generous, thoughtful and often filled with humour that Ted was so well known for. They are memories I treasure to this day. Madam Speaker, to Ted's family and loved ones, we of course extend our deepest condolences. We recognise that behind the public figure was a husband, a father, a friend and a colleague. The outpouring of support at his state memorial is a testament to the esteem in which he was held by so many people. Madam Speaker, Ted's legacy will endure. In the historical record, in the songs that he wrote, and in the countless relationships he nurtured across this vast territory. Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory, of course, is better for his life and richer for his contribution. Vale Ted Egan, AO.
Member for Mulca.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Towards the end, I'd like to sing 2 lines of the songs he wrote in Gallionco, in Elko Island, when I was a boy. Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise to share my condolence to the family, friends and community of the Northern Territory as we remember Ted Egan. Ted Egan was known very well across Aboriginal communities, and he was well known in Arnhem Land. I remember him coming to Elko Island when I was a teenager. I remember seeing him playing music in the community and at school concerts. It was very exciting to see him playing on the stage with Yolngu musicians. And this was a time when Elvis, Cliff Richards, and Slim Dusty, and many more were becoming known in Yolngu communities, and this kind of music was amazing for Yolngu people. We then saw Ted and our people on the stage together doing the same thing. The third time I saw him, he was singing with our language, in our language, and everyone was cheering and proud that he was learning about our language, our music, and our culture. When he arrived on Elko Island, he sat down with the people and was interested in the music that local people were making, and he wanted to be a part of it. He wanted to collaborate and share music with the people. He was a man that wanted to come and live with the people, learning culture and language. He sang with top musicians who were part of Yolngu bands. He sang with Wako Dick Munongo of We'll Be Wait listening from home in Gallionco. Dick was a band member of the Soft Sands Band, which is a very well-known band from Elko Island that started in the 1970s. They started with a band that we call a string band, actually, because it used a fishing line that was tied to a wooden as a drum, and Dick played on the acoustic guitar. It is one of the oldest bands that was established on Elko Island. I thank Ted and spent time in Aboriginal communities rather, with people working in partnership and learning about who we are really, and learning about the strength of our community and our culture. He became a champion for Aboriginal land rights. This was important for our people, that not only did he see as friends, but he also saw the injustice and stood with us to try and make the things right. Ted went on to become a administrator of the Northern Territory. He was a good choice for the role because he was interested in people, and he was wanting to learn about Aboriginal people from all over the Northern Territory. He was curious and thoughtful, caring and kind. And these qualities made him qualified to be a leader of the NT. He cared about people, all people, and he was standing as a leader for everyone in the NT. In our Yolngu communities, we really admired him and felt that he was a true friend, someone who could stand beside us and appreciate our culture, walking with us, and understood partnership and wood working together. He was a fair person who contributed to the world with kindness and generosity. We will remember him fondly. His music and his kindness has been imprinted on our lives and in our memories, and they are memories of truly good times for our communities. Madam Speaker, if I can sing 2 lines, thank you.
That would be lovely.
It's a lullaby song he sang. Good night, little children. Time to go to bed. Good night, little children. Ooh-la, loo-la-lay. Loo-la, 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 loo-la-lay. Good night, little children. Time to go to bed. Yakano matomo mano malang bapa miringunay. Yakano matomo mano malang andi miringunay. Yakano matomo mano malang bapa miringunay. Yakano matomo mano malang andi miringunay. Lula lula lula. Ooh-la, loo-la-lay. Ooh-la, loo-la, loo-lay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Yo.
Member for Braitling. That's a hard act to follow, isn't it?
That is, Madam Speaker. I'll break in the song halfway through, but I think it'll be quite as beautiful as the member for Mulca. Ted Egan AO was a true Territorian in every aspect of his life. He passed away at the age of 93 on December the 4th, 2025. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Ted's wife Neris, his 4 children, Greg, Margaret, Mark and Jackie, his 7 beloved grandchildren and 16 great-grandchildren. We thank Neris, Greg and Margaret for being in attendance today, along with many other close friends of Ted's. Ted Egan was a man who rubbed shoulders with royalty and boss drovers alike. I was fortunate enough to know Ted personally. I had the pleasure of listening to him play the beer carton at Newcastle Waters and at many events over the years. He was probably more comfortable in a pub playing on the beer box than at the Ritz, but he would have never let you know. On one very memorable trip to the mates of the Murrinjai meetup, Ted was in attendance with his trusty beer box. And the crowd that had arrived were in the old pub at Newcastle Waters, and there Ted regaled the group with songs that spoke of driving cattle to Queensland. Matt Savage, the boss drover, he'll take the mob over, taking the bullocks to Queensland, ah. He would sing and everyone would listen, or sing along with the songs they loved. Later that afternoon, as we made our way from Newcastle Waters to the Daily Waters pub for a few refreshments, I pulled into the Highway Inn, and to my surprise, a Ted Egan box set sat at the counter of the Roadhouse. I purchased it then and there, and after a memorable night, listened to that 6-disc box set where Ted spoke about his life in between songs. The 5 hours to Darwin and then the 14 hours home were where I really got to know Ted, listening to him explain the songs and how they came to be. When I attended Ted's State Memorial on the 17th of February, it was a privilege to hear Ted's family members, friends, colleagues and fellow musicians share fond memories of his life. Ted was the definition of a true Territorian. He was a Territory legend who wore many hats and had a strong commitment to community. I would like to extend my sincere condolences and thoughts to Ted's family and everyone who is grieving his loss. Ted's legacy will live on for generations to come through the thousands of lives he has touched over his many years of service to this great nation and to the Northern Territory. I feel lucky to have known him, even if for a fleeting moment of his incredible life. Ted has left a lasting impact on the Territory and he will be greatly missed. Gone, but never forgotten. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Gwaja.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to acknowledge the passing of Ted Egan AO. And Madam Speaker, those who know Ted know he was a good man. A man who was a bloody good man. Ted Egan spent most of his life in the Northern Territory. Ted Egan was not just someone who lived in the Territory, he belonged to it. For more than 70 years, he helped tell stories of this place, the people, the land, the struggles and the moments that shaped the Territory as who we are today. When Ted first arrived in the Territory in the late 40s, as a young patrol officer, like many who came north, he quickly discovered the Territory has a way of getting into your bones. Through his work travelling across remote regions, Ted built a deep relationship with the people across the bush, particularly with our Aboriginal communities. Those experiences shaped his understanding of this country and gave him a lifelong respect for the cultures and the histories that have existed here for thousands of years. Ted was always strong in acknowledging country, and I acknowledge that he spent much of his later life on the beautiful Arrernte country. Ted believed strongly in the stories that mattered to the Territory and the stories that needed to be told honestly. Many Territorians remember Ted as a bush balandeer, travelling with his guitar and singing songs about Territory life. He captured songs with his humour, with his hardship, and with the characters that make the North so unique. But they were more than just songs, Madam Speaker. They were history. Ted used music and storytelling to make sure that stories from the bush, stories that might have otherwise faded away, were never faded and were never forgotten. He dedicated much of his life to documenting important chapters of the Territory's history. In particular, Ted helped bring wider recognition to the Gurindji story, our story, my story, Madam Speaker, the Wave Hill Walk-Off, one of the most important moments in the struggle for Aboriginal land rights in our country. Ted stood and he acknowledged these histories and that they were essential to truly understanding the Territory and its people. We've heard, Madam Speaker, that Ted was appointed the Administrator of the Northern Territory in 2003. But what we haven't heard today and celebrated was he was the first Central Australian Administrator. The Centre had a voice like never before in Ted. It was a fitting recognition of his life dedicated to public service, to storytelling, to music, and to the preservation of Territory history. During that time, Ted carried himself with humility and warmth. He never forgot the people he had met across the bush or the Territory and the communities that shaped his life. Ted Egan helped Australians understand something that many Territorians already know. The Northern Territory is not just a place, it's a collection of songs, of stories, of culture. Stories of resilience, stories of culture, stories of people who have lived and cared for this land for thousands of years. Ted spent his life making sure those stories were heard. Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Gwadja people, from the communities from Kalgoorlie to the red heart of the nation in Mutijulu, we express our condolences to Ted, his family and his friends who are here. His stories, he has honoured our histories. He has reminded us of this place, its cultural richness and its incredibly vibrant diversity, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in 2002, I was very fortunate to be part of the Year of the Outback celebrations, and we were doing the last camel train from Oodnadatta to Alice Springs. We walked camels for 540 kilometres over 3 weeks. Ted Egan was instrumental in being on the committee to establish that very celebration, to acknowledge the amazing contributions that our Afghan community members had made to Central Australia. And Madam Speaker, as you can appreciate, over 3 weeks, every night Ted did, when he was there, what he did best: bring people together. At night, the campfires glowing, the wine flowing, and Madam Speaker, there certainly was a beer carton or two. We did sing about the bloody good drinkers from the Northern Territory. We sang about the drover's boy, and every night was a celebration, an important recognition. I also, Madam Speaker, grew up on Undulya Road, and I lived next to an amazing Territorian, Morag McGrath. And every night on the weekends, sometimes Ted and beautiful Neris would pop over. You'd have Scotty Balfour, you'd have Dave Evans, you'd have Bob Barford, you'd have Dave McCall. And I used to hide in the corner of the yard because I could hear him singing, Madam Speaker. And it was beautiful. You would hear that. I also lived behind one of Ted's children. I think it was Mark, and Stephen, his grandson, was my next door neighbour. So I grew up in a household very fortunate to hear the music of Ted Egan. Also, Madam Speaker, I grew up in a generation of the cassette. Now, not many people would know what that is these days, but our school holidays were spent driving to Darwin or to Katherine or to Adelaide. And many times the Ted Egan cassette would be thrown in the cassette player, and as kids we'd be listening to Arnhem Lullaby, the Europunga Frog, or, Madam Speaker, Ride On Little Cowboy. And they were amazing stories. I don't think there is a Territorian who can't recall having an interaction with the giant that was and is Ted Egan, Madam Speaker. He has shaped the Territory to be a better place. He has led with honesty, with humility, with passion and commitment. And as we've heard here today, his memorial service in February this year in beautiful Alice Springs was a celebration of his life, and to see, Madam Speaker, the community come together to recognise just how important he was truly remarkable. Madam Speaker, I want to acknowledge an amazing contribution at that service by none other than an amazing Territory talent, and that was Sally Balfour. That was Scotty and Ursula Balfour's beautiful daughter, who gave an amazing contribution and song at that service. And it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge and mention that there was the mighty band Bloodwood at the funeral, and I wanted to, just say how amazing and beautiful it was to have Bob Barford, Scotty Balfour, Dave Evans, Dave McGill, Graham Pete, I think, Barry Skipsey, and of course Ross Muir, all there to celebrate and really acknowledge that contribution, Madam Speaker. And 93 years is an amazing number. It's 93 years that we need to just reflect on how important those years have been. I want to, of course, thank Neris, thank Greg, Jackie, Mark and Marg for sharing Ted with us, for allowing him to go on and do what he did, because he did it so well. We've heard the stories, of course, of the Territory's Chief Minister, Claire Martin, ringing Ted. And when we were at the funeral, Eva Lawler, Natasha Files and myself went to dinner with Claire, and we were talking, and she was telling this story about ringing Ted. And she said, I think he was on the road somewhere with Neris, and we spoke. And Ted said, Claire rang and said, I want you to be the administrator. And Ted said, oh no, okay. Claire said, not the response I was hoping for. And she said, why don't you sleep on it and speak to Neris? Fortunately, the next day, Ted had thought about it and accepted the role and did an amazing job at that role, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I do just want to acknowledge and pass on my condolences from particularly the communities of Dargaragu and Kalgarinji, who, when we did speak about this, they said, let that poor bugger rest now. He done a lot of good work. He'd been a good voice for us and our people. And Madam Speaker, you can always measure the life and the success of someone when you go out to the most remote parts of the Territory and you mention that name and you are greeted with a smile and you are greeted with a story. Because that encapsulated Ted Egan, a storyteller, a musician. And those of you who have been to Alice Springs, and if you've been fortunate enough to make it out to sink a tinny Downs, Ted's beautiful and Neris' beautiful property out in the rural area, Canallan of Alice Springs, you will know that that place was and always will be filled with memories, filled with love, and filled with excitement for the Territory, because Ted was one of the best ambassadors the Territory ever had and will ever have. So may he rest in peace and power and in music.
Member for Port Darwin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak on the condolence motion to Ted Egan, in probably a little bit of a different way to what we've heard so far. We've heard what an amazing contribution this man made to our community, to our Territory, but I'd just like to talk about my personal story with Ted. So when I came to the Territory about 3 decades ago, I had no idea who Ted Egan was. His music wasn't really something that I had encountered when I grew up in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, and even though I was part of the music scene, I was more into the rock and roll and then jazz and then musical theatre. And then I came to the Territory and people were talking about this incredible talent, Ted Egan. And I made it my business to find out a little bit more about Ted Egan, and I listened to his music and I listened to his songs. And really, Madam Speaker, as a fellow musician, what struck me was just how wonderful a storyteller he was. Having dabbled on occasion with trying to write songs and write music, I knew how hard that was, and listening to his stories in his music and understanding just what went into the creation of those beautiful works, I really need to meet this man. And I was very fortunate over the next few years to bump into him from time to time at various events, at various places where he might pop up and be performing, and I got to see him perform, and I got to see just what a joyous occasion it was whenever Ted Egan was in the room. And then I had the very, very special opportunity after he was appointed as administrator of meeting Ted and then Neris at Government House. I had over the years been participating and supporting an event that Government House Foundation had run at Government House, which was called Kids Fun Day. And Kids Fun Day was one day a year where Government House opened its doors to kids with special needs so they could come and have a really good time playing on fire engines and riding in police cars and going for Harley-Davidson rides and for checking out what was behind all the secret doors, and most importantly, getting to eat lots of food and drink lots of red cordial, which I think probably wasn't the best thing for the mums and the dads, but the kids had the best time. And every year there was a theme, and the one that sticks in my mind the most of the more than a decade that I did that was the year that Ted and Neris decided we should all be superheroes. And purely out of the necessity of being pretty much the only costume that I could find, I went as Wonder Woman. And we all had the best day, Madam Speaker, and I got to spend some time at the end of the day when all the kids had been cleared out, and we got to sit down and have our own glass of red cordial and a party pie and a sandwich and having a chat with Neris and Ted. And from that minute on, for Ted, I was known as Wonder Woman. And wherever I met him going forward, that was pretty much how the conversation would start. It would be, "How are you going, Wonder Woman?" And then it would progress from there. And Ted was one of those people who made you feel part of his life, whether you'd known him for a moment or for decades. And I was forever grateful for having the opportunity to be able to spend some time with Ted. And I think one of the things that I loved the most about him was just the dedication with which he took the time to get to know people and understand them and hear their stories. And when he found a story that he thought other people should know about, he turned it into song. And one of my great memories of the last few times that my husband Len and I had chats with Ted was when he was writing the Paragon Cafe, which was about a Catherian migrant who opened a cafe called the Paragon Cafe in Wagga Wagga. Many people won't know, but my husband's family are from Kithra, and his dad, George, had the Paragon Cafe in High Street in Maitland. And so Ted really grilled Len about what that was like, what it meant, the Greek contribution to our community. And I'm pretty confident that there's not really many country towns across Australia that didn't have a Paragon Cafe, and that was owned by a Greek migrant. And the story that he told in that song was just how important our culture, our multicultural society is, and just how long and how deep those roots go. And I think I will be forever grateful for Ted for reminding us that it doesn't matter where we come from. It doesn't matter what our story has been. It just matters where we're going to take it into the future. He was, without question, a man ahead of his time. He paved the way forward for us, and we can't forget that. And one of my greatest regrets, Neris, is in spite of the many invitations that were extended for Len and I to join you in your beautiful home in Alice Springs, we never quite got there because we were always too busy. We were always too short of time to spend that extra moment travelling down to Alice to spend that time with people that we cared very much about. And I think it's a good reminder that even though we think that people will be there forever, Sadly, that's not the case. So I feel very lucky that my journey crossed paths with Ted and Neris. And I extend my deepest condolences to you and your family and to the world for what they've lost in his passing, but for what we've gained in the fact that he was here with us. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I feel great privilege in being able to stand here today to join with this condolence motion for Ted Egan. And first, let me acknowledge all those in the chamber today who are feeling the loss of Ted most keenly. His wife and companion Neris, his children and all his friends and family. So as for anyone growing up in my generation in Australia, except for maybe the member for Port Darwin, Ted Egan was a household name in my house as a country music singer. As a young adult, I started attending folk festivals, as I continue to do so to this day. And though I'm not a music maker, and I absolutely promise not to sing, you'll all be very happy about that, it's an enduring joy to me to be surrounded by people making music, expressing their real lived experiences through songs, through poetry, through dance and storytelling. In the early 2000s, our family regularly camped with other families at the Top Half Folk Festival, which was then held on alternate years at Mary River, and Ted Egan held court as one of the founders and long-standing patrons of the festival. In those days, it was very much a do-it-yourself festival, no big-name acts, only locals sharing stories, songs, poetry and meals. And Ted was always at the centre, generously sharing his lived experience across the length and breadth of the Northern Territory and of its people in song, in verse and in tale. But it was only after a few years of living here that I understood the unique place in time and in the territory that Ted and his music occupied. It was music that came not only from observation but immersion in the front line of relations between the many cultures, communities and people of this place. And it was a reflection of his deep values of equality of all, respect for culture and commitment to making this a more just and fair society for all. He shared his views and stories with humility and warmth, with reflection and with the wistful charm of his poetic soul. Ted was no stranger to a drink or two, and some of his finest tales captured the misadventures of Territorians with alcohol. One year at the folk festival, we were quietly amused when the group of children we were camped with spontaneously broke into one of Ted's catchier tunes. We've got some bloody good drinkers in the Northern Territory, and then walked through the festival singing that for the rest of it. Ted made time to connect with people of all ages and backgrounds, even our little children, some of them babes in arms. He sought connection and common ground with everyone he met, and he welcomed and amplified other voices, no matter what their background, age or circumstance. His work on reconciliation is widely recognised, and as the Administrator of the Northern Territory, he brought this warmth and humility to all his official and unofficial activities, continuing to play from his strengths as a storyteller and keen observer of the details of life in the bush, in towns, in the desert and in the top end. And he didn't stop when that job was over, but put his reflections and thoughts into a book, which I've got here if anyone wants to read it, Due Inheritance, which proposed innovative approaches to solving some of the most tricky and persistent issues in the Northern Territory. He set out his ideas clearly and without fear or favour, and it was a shame that this book didn't receive wider consideration and recognition. Ted continued to attend the Top Half Folk Festival till only a couple of years ago when he was no longer able to travel. And I know that this year people will be gathering at Ross River in Central Australia for the next festival and be remembering Ted, his songs, his stories, his generosity and his unique and enduring contribution to the Northern Territory. Ted reminded us that leadership and influence are not only measured in office or power, but in the courage to listen, to learn, to connect, to amplify others, and to leave a community stronger and more united than you found it. Thank you, Ted, for everything that you gave to the Northern Territory, and to your family for sharing him with all of us. Vale Ted Egan, you are deeply missed.
Member for Karama.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and can I also pass on my condolences to Neris and the family and all the friends and etc. Look, I got to know Ted, first of all, through a book, and I think it was called Sit Down Up North. And it was a great book, it was a fantastic read, and it was started off in his early days. And it relayed the story of when him and his mate Ronnie Smith, they were 17-year-olds, travelled up. They were going to head off to South America. And they arrived in Darwin, I think it was around Easter time. There were two young 17-year-olds. And of course, nothing was open, whatever. So they were just living off a bit of bread and all that stuff. But I do recall that I think they were looking for a bit of casual work. And someone said, they took a liking to him. They said, why don't you go down to this pub or whatever on a Friday evening, catch up, say hello to these people. And this was your interview for the public service, because they had a lot of the public service heads there. And the two questions were, or the only question was, what sport do you play? And I think Ted said he played AFL or football, so he was obviously sent off to a department that had a strong football team. Ronnie Smith was a cricketer, so he went off to Works and Jerks, or the old Transport and Works, as we call it. Now, I mentioned Ronnie because I knew Ronnie when I first arrived in Darwin. And I went out and I ran into him and a group of his mates out at the golf course. And we got to play together. And at that stage, if you knew Ronnie Smith, he was an old bookie. He used to run a bookie on the side and do all this stuff. And Ted knew all that too, may I say. But so we got to partner up every now and then, and they used to call us the rookie and the bookie. At one stage, I used to be able to play, but not now, not so much now. But having said that, when I read through and I'd have all these discussions with Ron, what you got out of it was Ted was a leader, definite leader. He was an educator, certainly a sports person. We've got all the St Mary's people over here, Vic Ludwig and all the others. He was a raconteur. We've heard a lot from others saying about that. He was an entertainer. I can definitely say he was an entertainer. Neris, you know that too. You sing together, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the main thing is he was a genuine Territorian. A genuine Territorian. His heart was in the Territory. And he was of the old school. He was a big life character, and he had a great sense of humour. Great sense of humour. So if we just move on a little bit, back when we had the railway, and I'm conscious that we've got Barry Calder up in the audience there. And Barry obviously played a big role in getting the railway built and so on. But then we got into the operational phase, and I also pay tribute to Claire Martin in this space as well. So we had to get the attention going of this railway's up and going. And I think in 2004 we ran one conference up in Darwin. It was great. All the big businesses people came. But we thought we'd better do something different next time. And I will say it was my idea. We came up with the concept, why don't we run a conference aboard the train, because the Ghana had just started up, and run the conference from Darwin to Alice Springs, which we did. And I think we had about 240 business people on that train. And I think we had a plenary session in Katherine at the cinema, and we had another plenary session down in Alice Springs at the convention centre. But in between, there was a long journey, I can tell you that. And Ted, we took his advice, and I think, Neris, you may have been on that. Absolutely, you were there, singing your Welsh songs and everything else. Ted said, Brian, let me give you a hint. It's the second day and night that's going to be the most fantastic. And he was absolutely right. Because the first one, they're all trying to get on the train, trying to figure out where they're going to sit, whatever. Second day and night, well, of course, in between the plenary sessions, there's no mobile phones. You've got no coverage. There was plenty of that red cordial that the member for Port Darwin, the adult red cordial, was flowing, may I say, and plenty of carton beers that the member of Guadja was talking about. But it was the singing and the entertainment, and Ted was at front and centre of that. And he was absolutely right. We had the most enjoyable journey. He also said, now, when you get to Adelaide, you're going to have your sea legs, and you get off the train, you really wobble for the next day or so. But he was fantastic and a true entertainer, may I say. So what I'd like to say, though, is, this was getting networking. He was the best networker of all time, Ted was. And he brought everyone together, and when he made speeches, all those people on the train felt special. He made them feel special, and that was fantastic. But now, just to finish up, Madam Speaker, I go back to my own mother, who used to say, now, Brian, you're going to come across, you're young now, but you're going to come across a lot of people and they're going to pass on. They're going to pass on. The question you've got to ask is, were you and everyone else better off for those people being in your lives? And in terms of the Honourable Ted Egan, it's a resounding yes. Absolutely yes. We're much better off for knowing him than not knowing him. Thank you very much.
Member for Arafura.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bupani Japanari, good morning on TV. I thank the Chief Minister for bringing the condolence motion this morning in respect to the great man, Ted Egan. Where do I start with a man that's done absolutely everything in the Territory, travelling the depth, width, length of the Territory, speaking multiple languages as well. I'd like to talk a bit about his involvement with Tiwi people today, and go back down memory lane when I was at Wurrumianga, and I'm not too sure whether it was a grand final or a festival, and all these elders walking around with one white man in the middle, and we're all like, who's that? And he's speaking Tiwi. He's replying to, the likes of Robert Tipmuri, our elders, Robert Hyson Tangatalam, all speaking Tiwi to him, and he's responding. And I did not personally know him, but from that point on, I needed to know what he was about. So when I read a bit about him and got to know him, he did a lot for Tiwi people. And also other Indigenous groups in the Territory. He was a stalwart. He learnt language and culture. He lived in West Arnhem, Tiwi. I didn't live in Tiwi, but went there and worked, but lived in West Arnhem, East Arnhem, Borroloola in the desert. He was a patrol and officer and advocate for Indigenous people. In the 1950s, he worked as a patrol officer and protector of Aboriginals in remote areas. Later serving in the first Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation and becoming an outspoken champion for land rights. He participated in cultural preservation as well. In the 1970s, he recorded singing and dancing of various cultures, and we've got a museum with all those recordings now at the Tiwi Island. Amazing, amazing work. His respect and his friendship throughout the Territory was maintained throughout the years, and that showed at I didn't go to the funeral down in Alice, but Tiwi leaders went, and they all spoke about it and told me about it. And if we had it our way, we'd do a book of money ceremony ourselves with him at Tiwi Island. But obviously, we've got to go to the place where he last lived. He played a big role in the St. Mary's Footy Club as one of the founding members. And I tell you what, I didn't play for St. Mary, I played for Palmerston. But 34 premierships, 21 runners-up, 33 minor premiers, and only one wooden spoon. So, they don't see the bottom that much. And absolutely, footy is infused in our culture now in Tiwi Islands. We participate all over Australia. And he's produced, St. Mary Footy Club has produced some of the greatest Aboriginal players in the AFL. Morris Rioli, Michael Long, who I'd like to acknowledge at the back of the room over there. Ronnie Burns for Geelong, Cyril and, the other Riolis, Cyril and Daniel, Premiership player, Ben Long currently, and then you got Austin Wanameri from my hometown of Millacarpity. I want to just touch on those times where he saw talent in Indigenous players. So we played footy over on the Tiwi Island, Tiwi people in the 50s, and didn't participate in the bigger league in the territory. I was just reading an article from Sister Anne who said that they'd put material in to make a mimic of footy, and then they'd play like that. And then it was only Ted Egan that brought our players across and put them in the team, and they participate, and the rest is history. I thank the family for obviously letting him go to all these remote communities, learning languages, probably eating bush tucker too, something I'm very keen on when I go to different areas. But it was his fight for land rights and recognition of Aboriginal culture that's put us on the map, and I thank him for it.
I too would like to make a contribution to this condolence motion brought on by the Chief Minister. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge former Deputy Chief Minister Barry Coulter in the gallery this morning. On behalf of honourable members, welcome. My dad loved Ted Egan. We're from Grafton. Dad was a bushie from the Clarence River, the top of the Clarence River. And Dad was born in 1932, the same year as Ted Egan. They were of the same vintage. And so when I moved to Alice Springs in the early 90s, Dad was right onto it. When they came for their annual visit to Alice Springs from Grafton, all the way in the rig, I had to book in to see Ted Egan. So the first time I saw him was at Shadow Hornsby, the old winery in Alice Springs. And I thought, oh my God, who is this dude playing a VB carton? But I quickly got it. And after several concerts, Ted also played at the Old Windmill, which is now the Alice Springs Brewery. I totally got it, and I became enthralled by his music, his beautiful music. The beautiful songs, Sayonara Nakamura, The Drover's Boy, the Europunga Frog, the Bloody Good Drinkers of the Northern Territory. They have transfixed and thrilled Australians across the breadth and depth of this country for years. My father in Grafton loved Ted Egan, and I'm sure he had fans right across Australia. Well, he did, and across the world. I'd like to pay my deepest respects to Neris, the talented and vivacious, very Welsh Neris, who comes from the same part of Wales as my mother came from. And Ted's 4 children, Greg, Mark and Jackie, who I work with at the Alice Springs Hospital many years ago. And it's very nice to see Ray Egan here today too. Along with the wider Egan family, I'd like to extend my sincerest condolences. There will never be another Ted Egan. At this point in a condolence motion in the Northern Territory Legislative Assembly, we usually stand together in silence to reflect and remember. But I thought to myself, silence? This is his last stage. So I contacted Neris and I said, silence or a song? And Neris quickly got on to the lovely Sally Balfour, who's here this morning and has arranged for Sally to sing one of Ted's amazingly beautiful songs that we had a segue to earlier from the member for Mulka, very beautifully. So welcome, Sally, who's going to sing the Arnhem Land Lullaby. Please enjoy this wonderful song. Sally's family obviously have been very close to Ted and Neris over the years. Scotty Balfour was a leading celebrity in Alice Springs for many years. So welcome, Sally. Thank you so much. And please sing along.
Yeah. I'd like to say I'm really honoured to stand here and sing Arnhem Lullaby. Thank you, Neris. And I'd like to acknowledge that I am singing in Yolngu Matha and English on Larrakia country and pay my respects to First Nations people. Good night, little children. It's time to go to bed. Hush now, little baby. Rest your little head. Mother's here beside you. Father's with you too. Good night, little children. Ooh la loo la loo. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Good night, little children. Ooh la loo la loo. Yakanoma dumu manuma lang bapa miringuna. Yakanoma dumu manuma lang ani miringuna. Yakanoma dumu manuma lang bapa miringuna. Yakanoma dumu manuma lang ani miringuna. Noises in the darkness need not worry you. Possums are out working, frogs are croaking too. Book, book, the brown pheasant, mock the wise old owl. Curlews cry like babies, lonely dingoes howl. So good night, little children, it's time to go to bed. Hush now, little baby, rest your little head. Mother's here beside you, Father's with you too. Good night, little children. Ooh la loo la loo. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Good night, little children. Ooh la loo la loo. Dances in the firelight, songman sings his song. Didgeridoo is droning through the night so long. Stars are bright above you, moonbeams through the trees. Tell the story of how we came to be. So good night, little children. It's time to go to bed. Hush now, little baby. Rest your little head. Mother's here beside you. Father's with you too. Good night, little children. Ooh la loo la loo. Yakanoma dumoma noma lang bapa miringuna. Yakanoma dumoma noma lang ani miringuma. Yakanoma dumoma noma lang bapa miringuna. Yakanoma dumoma noma lang ani miringuna. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Ooh la loo la loo la. Ooh la loo la loo. Good night, little children. Ooh la loo la loo.
I've actually, Sally mentioned to me yesterday afternoon that she's releasing a recording of another one of Ted's songs. So I'm going to completely indulge us all and ask her to sing it. One more song, and this one's a special one, Sayonara, our beautiful Ted Egan.
When the luggers divers all sailed away from Roebuck Bay on that fateful day. The diver on the B-19 was Nakamura, not yet 21, from the land of the island sun, and his homeland was the island Okinawa. From the deepest holes of the Lassapee shoals to fulfill the diving master's calls went the diver on the B-19 Nakamura. His quest for the lustrous pearl, as strong as his love for his beautiful girl, he'd wed when he returned to Okinawa. From the west came a tropical squall, and the mercury began to fall. 40 fathoms deep was Nakamura. Set sail, no time to stage, for the storm began to rage, and they dragged to the surface the boy from Okinawa. With the agony in his eyes, an old Malay man begins to cry, for he knows that the bends have got young Nakamura. Helplessly they cursed as the diver's lungs near burst, and he died on the deck, the boy from Okinawa. And it's goodbye now, farewell. Say goodbye to Okinawa, for today they'll bury you in West Australia. You will never be as one with the land of the rising sun. Sayonara, sayonara, Nakamura. To the diver's cemetery in Broome, bearing gifts so deep in gloom, they carried the body of the diver Nakamura. Headstones face the west, 1,000 divers alive at rest, and they're joined today by the boy from Okinawa. And it's goodbye now, farewell. Say goodbye to Okinawa, for today they'll bury you in West Australia. You will never be as one with the land of the rising sun. Sayonara, sayonara, Nakamura. And it's goodbye now, farewell. Sayonara, Okinawa. Kimi ga nemoruchi Nishi Australia. No kairenu sokoku ni itoshiki perusato. Sayonara, sayonara, Nakamura. Sayonara, sayonara, Nakamura.
Thanks, Sally. That was beautiful. That concludes this condolence motion for Ted Egan this morning. I now invite you all to join us for refreshments out in the main hall. But before I do that, the formality of Parliament. The question is that the condolence motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. Parliament, the Assembly will resume after lunch at 2 p.m. Thank you.